Hey guys, it's Max. Today we're going to be comparing Dell's brand new 2019 XPS 13 2-in-1 with Intel's latest 10th generation Ice Lake chip, the chip that we've been waiting for a long time, with Apple's 2019 13-inch MacBook Pro. Both of these laptops are pretty spec'd out and the MSRPs are identical, but we'll talk about price in just a little bit because it does get interesting. We'll be taking a look at the build quality, the design, the displays, keyboards, trackpads, speakers, the CPU and graphics performance, and more. So let's go ahead and start out with the exteriors. And the MacBook Pro is thin and light, but if we stack both these on top of each other, you will actually see that the new Dell XPS is slightly shorter and a little bit narrower. And as far as thickness, the XPS is a little bit thicker because it has these little feet that stick out a little bit more, and the lid is also slightly thicker as well. But overall, both on the size and the weight, the XPS is smaller. Now, I'll be honest, I do prefer the look of the MacBook. It is more of a squarish design with flat edges. But with that said, the XPS is also excellent, especially for a Windows laptop. It has an all aluminum design, and the base here is actually etched out of a single piece of aluminum, so it's very rigid. We have these nice shiny aluminum edges over here, aluminum lid. It is very nice. It feels nice to the hand, and it is high quality. Now, we also have this hinge, which is a mix of materials, but we also have aluminum over here, and that shows the 2-in-1 design, but I'll talk about that in just a second. Taking a look at the right side, the MacBook Pro gives us 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports and a headphone jack, whereas the Dell XPS gives us just 1 Thunderbolt 3 port, and that's because we do have the higher end 4 Thunderbolt 3 port model. And then on the other side, once again, the Mac Pro has 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports instead of 1, but the Dell XPS does give us a micro SD card slot, which is really nice. Now, if we go ahead and open it up, we also have a little bit of a difference here. The Dell XPS has this kind of a Kevlar carbon style finish. It's soft to the touch. It doesn't get cold, so it is pleasant, but it will pick up, let's say, maybe grease, fingerprints, stuff like that a little bit more compared to the MacBook Pro, which has an easier hinge that opens up. We still have the all aluminum design, which visually looks more premium, but it is a little bit colder. Now, there's also a difference with this edge where this is a little bit softer, so if you're typing for a long time, especially if you're sitting at a desk, it's gonna be a little more comfy compared to this really kind of sharp edges on the MacBook Pro. As we move on, you're gonna see that these laptops have more similarities than you might think, which definitely isn't a bad thing. Starting off with fingerprint sensors to log in, we have Touch ID for the MacBook Pro and the Windows Hello fingerprint authentication. And right when we get to the desktops, probably the biggest thing that you're gonna notice right away looking at them is the difference in the bezels. So Dell, once again, has their infinity bezel, but now it might even be thinner. It is just incredible to look at compared to the MacBook, which side by side looks a little bit old and outdated. Both these also have 16:10 displays, so Dell did change from a 16:9 to a 16:10, and that really helps when you have a small display like these 13-inch displays. Now, we also have a difference in the actual panels. So we have a 2880 panel by 1600 on the MacBook Pro, which is kind of between 1080p and 4K, versus slightly higher than 4K with the Dell XPS, and it is also a touchscreen. Now, I'm personally not really into touchscreen laptops, but I'm also not really into touch bars. I only use the MacBook Pro's touch bar when I absolutely have to. Let's take a closer look at the displays. I have a video here ready to watch so we can compare the quality, but before that, I want to comment on the brightness. Now, both of these are maxed out, and they are very close. I would say the XPS is maybe slightly brighter, but you could probably say they're identical. And as far as the brightness shift, even though they're very similar when you're looking right at them, if you're looking from the side, the MacBook Pro has more brightness shift, so it gets dimmer if you're looking off axis, and maybe some of the contrast gets a little bit washed out as well. Now, the MacBook Pro does have True Tone turned on. Comparing the actual detail from the displays, it is hard to see on standard web pages and your desktop, things like that. If you're streaming a 4K video, then you could tell that the Dell is slightly more detailed. They're both 100% sRGB and getting close to that DCI P3 color rating, so both very color accurate. The XPS's 4K display is also HDR certified, so it is playing back in HDR. Now I also noticed that we have a little bit better contrast and that Windows has not yet been activated on this XPS right there at the bottom. Now one thing that I should mention is that with the Dell, if you buy a lower end model, you will get a 1080p display, whereas with the MacBook Pros, even if you buy a base model, it comes with the same exact display. On the plus side, if you have that 1080p display with this new Intel chip, you're gonna get roughly 2-ish hours better battery life than the MacBook Pro, which is already excellent, and with the 4K display, they should be quite similar. I have to give a huge thank you to Intel and Micro Center for providing us with this Dell XPS. Micro Center has 25 stores nationwide with an impressive amount of electronics, from gaming and VR, computer parts like processors, graphics, and everything else needed to build a PC. They also have a huge variety of desktops, laptops, and all the accessories that you need. Not only that, but also highly trained staff and low prices. Check out a local Micro Center today to get your hands on a bunch of products before buying, and you can also go onto their website where you can buy not only the Dell XPS, but also a wide variety of MacBook Pros at great deals. Next, let's look a little bit lower to the keyboards, and you're probably gonna notice a couple of things. First off, the Dell XPS keyboard looks very similar to the MacBook Pros, and second, on the MacBook Pro, we have speaker grills on the side, whereas the smaller Dell XPS doesn't have anything. They actually stretched out the keyboard, made the keys larger with smaller gaps in between, which is awesome. That's actually what we were asking for, but there is no room for any speaker grills, and that means the speakers are actually down firing. So before we test out the keyboards, let's go ahead and test out the speakers. Wow, there is definitely a huge difference. The MacBook Pro is louder, also has a lot more clarity. Now the XPS isn't bad, the sound quality is pretty decent, it just doesn't have the volume that you would want in louder environments. Now back to the keyboards, and as I mentioned, they are very similar. They're both really low profile, both of them have backlighting, but I would have to say the Dell XPS is a little bit better, even though we're fans of the MacBook Pro's keyboard. They both have that really clicky type of feel, but the Dell XPS has maybe close to double the key travel or somewhere around there. So I think it's a perfect blend of having a thin keyboard and right between a standard one and the MacBook Pros. Now, if you move down to the trackpad, the MacBook Pro has an excellent trackpad. It's definitely better. You have even feel no matter where you press because it uses magnets. You're not actually clicking, whereas the Dell, so you do click, but with that said, the Dell has a larger trackpad than before, and it is one of the best Windows trackpads we've ever used, and it's actually usable instead of being frustrating if you come from a MacBook. Now finally, it's time to talk about specs and performance. So we do have some numbers for you guys, but first off, I want to let you know that both of these have 1 terabyte of NVMe SSD storage, and also along with that, they have i7 processors, but the processors are quite different, and they both have Intel Iris Plus graphics, so it's great to see the higher end integrated Intel chips being used in a Windows laptop, just like Apple does with their MacBook Pros. Now, this MacBook Pro has a higher tier processor. It's a 2.8 gigahertz that goes all the way to 4.7. That is the best one that is offered in a MacBook Pro compared to 1.5 going up to 3.8 with the Dell XPS, but you'll see the performance numbers may show us a little bit of a difference other than just the spec, and that is because, as I mentioned at the start, this Dell XPS is the first laptop that has Intel's 10 nanometer processor, the Ice Lake chip, which gives us better efficiency and performance per clock. In Geekbench 4, the multi-core score is slightly higher with the MacBook Pro, but the single core is slightly higher with the Dell XPS, but they are both very close. And if we compare the Intel Iris graphics, the MacBook Pro is sitting at 52,000, which is crazy high for integrated graphics, compared to 39,000 with the Dell XPS. Now, even though it's lower on the XPS, it is quite a huge improvement compared to the previous XPS laptops. But we also have some numbers with the newer Geekbench 5, which is optimized for newer chips. And here when we compare it, the XPS beats out the MacBook Pro in both the multi-core and the single core. And then if we take a look at graphics performance with this new test, it's actually about 25% faster. So we have 10,400 compared to 7,500. So I'm not sure what they did with the new Geekbench 5, if it's more optimized or it's more like an equal playing field or what happened. But this newer chip does perform better. Along with that, fan noise is quite similar between the two, and it's nice to see a Windows laptop that isn't screaming constantly as far as the stock thermal profile. Now, another huge difference between these two laptops is the RAM. Our MacBook Pro has 16 gigabytes of LPDDR3 RAM, and that is the most that you can get, whereas the Dell XPS, not only does it use new LPDDR4 RAM that is quite a bit faster, but you can also spec it out to 32 gigabytes of RAM. That's the model that we have. So for the same price point, actually lower, I'll talk about that in just a sec, you can get that amount of RAM, which is impossible in a MacBook Pro. Now, in order to achieve this level of performance, the nice cooling that they have, the thin and light design, and with 32 gigs of RAM, Dell had to change up the way they did things. So with this new XPS, just like with the MacBook Pro, you cannot switch out your SSD, your RAM, your Wi-Fi chip, or anything else after you buy it. So make sure you spec it out the way that you're gonna need it, just like if you were gonna buy a MacBook Pro. Along with that, with the RAM, with the new processors, the high-end graphics, we also have the latest Wi-Fi chip with Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5. So that is great to have it built in. You're not gonna need to swap that out. So overall, this really packs a lot of performance. You also have a wide variety of configuration options. So this 2-in-1 with a 1080p screen can be bought for as low as $999, whereas with a MacBook Pro, if you get the model with 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, that is $1,300. Of course, you can add on, better processors with better graphics, better display, more storage, things like that, and it does get up to $2,700 MSRP. Both of these laptops are at that price point, but with the Dell, there is constantly a ton of sales and deals. So right now at Micro Center, you could pick this up for roughly $500 off of MSRP. So it brings it to a much lower price than the MacBook Pro, even though we have this new processor and double the RAM. So as far as value, the Dell XPS also provides a really good value. Now, of course, we have the difference between Windows and Mac OS. I definitely prefer Mac OS over Windows, but that is gonna be up to you guys. So overall, I think the Dell XPS is impressive. We definitely want the speakers to be better, maybe the trackpad to be improved if they could, but from all the Windows laptops that we have tested, this thing is probably the best premium 13-inch laptop that you can buy. So let me know down in the comment section below which one of these you guys would buy and why. Once again, a big shout out to Micro Center and Intel for sending us this Dell XPS. If you guys want to see the full review, that is right over there, and click above to subscribe and down below to enable notifications. This has been Max with MaxTech, and I will see you in the next video.